Good afternoon. It's Lee Cassidy with my regular Tuesday afternoon piece in the hot seat, where we get someone with a bit of interest in life to tell us about their journey through their career and a bit more about what they're doing today. Today we've got the ultimate. We've got a real globetrotter joining us. It's Sarah Bishop from Recruit, but she's not only a globetrotter, she's a bit of a Viennese as well. So let's bring our Viennese guest in. How are you doing then, Sarah?
Guten Tag, wie geht's? Yeah, really well, thanks, Lee. It's lovely and sunny here in Vienna.
The accent gives it away that you're not quite from Vienna, though.
No, I'm more of a Cockney yam really. Southeast
A
London,
combination
via
of London and the Black Country, then.
Absolutely,
yeah. So we normally start off with a bit of background of yourself. So if we could go back to the early days. So tell us a bit about your background, where you grew up. A bit about your parents, what they did for a living, and maybe a little bit about school time. So the kind of things that you enjoyed at school, what you were good at, and then we'll move into what you plan to do with yourself at that early age.
Crikey, there's a lot wrapped up in there, isn't there? Well, I grew up on a rather salubrious estate in southeast London called Thamesmead, TEMO, which was a bit of a 60s planner's dream for young families. It's got that brutalist architecture that was a bit of a signature of some of those plans for the sort of 60s and early 70s. I had a great time. I had a whale of a time growing up on the estate. We actually had quite a lot of open land. We had adventure playgrounds that would be illegal nowadays because they had big wooden structures and big ropes that you could swing off and run around and regularly fall off and break collarbones and wrists and such like. So it's all soft play areas now, isn't it? So
yeah, it's a little bit different. There was no real health and safety stuff, was there, with playgrounds back in the
definitely
60s and
not.
70s?
Yeah, definitely not. And it was actually a great place to grow up. It's actually quite infamous in a lot of areas now. So some of you, perhaps your younger viewers, may have watched Misfits on Channel 4 and Netflix. So that's filmed primarily on my old manor. And for the older audience, Clockwork Orange, there was a rather famous scene where a tramp was brutally kicked to death by the Droogs, and that happened in an underpass on Thamesmead as well. A lot of rappers and things use it as a backdrop for a kind of gritty kind of music video. So that's where I grew up. Had a lot of fun playing runouts at night. The traditional 70s thing. You see the memes, don't you? Went out on our bikes and had to be back by the time the street lights went on, and it was kind of that kind of a childhood. I went, some of you will probably be a bit surprised about this, but I went to Catholic schools for all of my schooling, primary and secondary schooling, mainly because my mum, who was herself a very lapsed Catholic, wanted me to have the discipline that they had in Catholic schools. And there was a nice Catholic primary, St John Fisher, on our estate. So mum went over. My mum and dad were actually never married, so they lived in Sing for 20 whatever years, and begged Sister Benignus, who soon became nicknamed Sister Big Knickers when I started school. And basically she got me into that school. And then for my secondary education, I went on to St Catherine's School in Bexley Heath. And I loved school. I think because I've got a brother, but he's 20 years older than me. So I essentially grew up as an only child. So going to school, it was like having all my brothers and sisters, or later on at secondary, all girls Catholic school, all my sisters, a bit like a mini family around me, really. And I really enjoyed school. I loved PE. I had a massive crush on my PE teacher for about 8.5 years. Hi, Yvonne. And geography, art. I loved everything. And I think I was reasonably proficient at most things, but never finished anything. So I'm ADHD, which is never a massive surprise to people. And I think even I grew up thinking that, it just means you're really distracted or you're hyper-focused and you can be a little bit unruly and rebellious. And it's only really been the last probably 10 years that I've appreciated how much it really messes with your executive function. So I also then latterly found several years ago that I'm high functioning autistic as well. So I'm not just contrary, I'm just sort of wired up a bit differently.
So
Yeah.
when did you find out about the ADHD? Was that quite early on, or was that again later in life, like the autism?
Yeah, I was diagnosed very young with ADHD. I was about 3,
Oh, so
but I
it
think,
was diagnosed fairly early then.
yeah, and really unusually in the 70s, particularly for girls, because even now, girls are more likely to have a diagnosis missed or be misdiagnosed. So, up until relatively recently, over 80% of all research into autism, ADHD, and neurodiversity was made primarily performed on male subjects. So, yeah, so but I was really lucky, but I had a very, a good old solid 1970s GP who didn't really believe in, drugs and whatever, and just said, and my mum said, well, I don't really want a labelled. We just need to find some coping mechanisms, I think. So
So,
yeah,
what
it
kind of
was.
things did you have to adapt into your life to make, to overcome any of the issues you had?
Well, I wasn't really allowed to have blue slush puppies for a start, which was a bit of a bummer because that used to really set me off. So
Oh,
mum was very careful about stimulants
chemical
in my
induced
diet.
madness from food colorings.
Yeah, yeah, I'd just be like off my head. So it was quite funny when I first went to school. So I'd take packed lunches and they'd have like chicken drumsticks and bananas and fresh fruit and stuff that mum had made from scratch. And a lot of my peers would open up their boxes and it would be a finger of fudge and a packet of crisps and a whatever. So I'd come back from school bouncing off the walls and mum would be like, oh, well, what's going on? Because I'd just be swapping all this wholesome stuff for rubbish with other people. So then she put me on school dinners fairly quickly. But yeah, it's funny how things come back that you haven't really thought of for years, actually, when you ask the question. But yeah, it was great halcyon days, isn't it? You're not really a care in the world in a lot of respects. So
So you said you like geography and a variety of other subjects. So did you have a plan in mind what you were going to do with yourself when you were getting a little bit older, come up to school leaving age?
not really. And I think partly, again, this is sort of understanding things like ADHD and neurodiversity a bit later on in life. I think that is partly because it was very difficult for me to entertain that far of a field, which I think most kids kind of have that at a certain age, don't you? Because you're immortal, aren't you? And your 32-year-old mum is like ancient and all those things. There's just no real kind of perspective, I think. In certain terms, but
Yeah,
also
we've had a little comment in from someone. So
oh,
Sam Ball says it's what makes you special. So
that's a
the
word you can
ADHD and
use.
everything.
There's others that people who perhaps are not so fond of me might choose, but thanks, Sam. Yeah, so I think it was. I think one of the other things that I found is this like enormous interest. It's that real shiny kind of thing. So it's very difficult to nail something down.
Yeah.
But it sort of flipped and changed quite a bit from wanting to be a vet, which you probably get a lot, to then realizing, oh, I don't think I could deal with, dying animals, to then wanting to be a PE teacher, to then wanting to be a police officer. Because remember, I was a child of the 70s, and with my latent gay tendencies, you could only be, in those days, the two career options were PE teacher or police officer for gay women, so it seems. But
You say latent. How long, when was it you realised then?
to be honest with you, I think I've always known. I was really, really lucky growing up. I grew up in London on the estate, as I say. We had a very eclectic bunch around us, very cosmopolitan. And 2 doors down from us were a family, Rose, Mavis, 5 kids between them, forces wives, fell in love on base in Germany. You can imagine how difficult that was when that all came out in the 70s. Dad kind of adopted the youngest son, Paul, taught him how to play golf. He was like another brother to me. And my mum and dad never sort of sat down and said, oh, Rose and Mavis are a bit different because they're 2 women with a family. Yeah. So I just grew up thinking it was an option, thinking it was just, what families look like. We had a Jamaican family on one side. We had a family that had moved from, like, literally from the Docklands, from Poplar, who'd been moved when they did the slum clearances that you watch in called The Midwife. Like, they literally were come from there next door. We had a real mix of people. We'd had a guy who'd been a diplomat for years who, I think him and his family escaped somewhere like Afghanistan, hidden in the bottom of a cart or something, like really bizarre. And then at the end of our balcony, which is called balcony because we had 3-story townhouses because Thamesmead's built on reclaimed Thames floodplains. At the end, there was a guy called Bernard Dix who was really high up in the trade unions movement, and it was quite funny because you say about my parents. So my dad was real peasant stock from Maidstone. Maidstone was quite in Kent, which is quite rural then. Came from a massive family, 10 kids. His dad apparently was there's a book going on when I'm going to drop an expletive, Lee, so I'm not going to I'm going to get through it, but he was right.
Well, I mentioned, when you mentioned the expletives, Des actually said, watch out for the F-bombs. So, so we know there's a potential, don't we?
Yeah, they've started a book, group. They've got time slots, I think, starting a book, and when I'm gonna drop one. So I'm being very, very careful because it's like, as you know, it's a bit like punctuation for me.
Yeah.
But my dad lied about his age, joined up in the army, was sent off to like sort of tail end of the war almost, got demobbed, came back and worked at Smithfield's markets in London, in the meat markets, saved up as much money as he could and basically started buying and selling cars, and eventually got himself like a bit of a car yard on the Old Kent Road, ran a few dealerships here, there and everywhere. I think he took on one of the first Hyundai dealerships, because I can remember him coming in one day and he was livid and he was like, these bloody Japanese, don't know what they're talking about. They need to listen to the UK market. And I was like, what's the matter? And it was when the Hyundai Pony had been released. Yeah. So for viewers that don't know, Pony, apart from being an amount of money in Cockney rhyming slang, something, if you call it's a load of old pony, it means it's crap. Pony and trap, crap.
Yeah.
So Dad was like, he's got this new line of cars that he needs to try and sell that are basically called the Hyundai sack of crap, for all intents and purposes, which was quite funny.
I think over the years, there's been a load of cars that people haven't thought about the connotations of the name in another language. I think there was one called a no-go. It doesn't work, in different languages and all sorts of things like that.
Well, somebody once told me that Pajero, which the Mitsubishi Pajero, is a slang term in Argentinian Spanish for apparently the favour that Boris Johnson had from Kerry to get the job when he was in the Foreign Office.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I'd say I think there's quite a few named cars that you wouldn't associate what they actually mean in other languages.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of my dad's background. He
sounded like he had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, though. If he was going out and buying cars and starting up on his own and then working with other dealerships and things, he had that entrepreneurial spirit within him.
Absolutely, yeah. And he had the gift of the gab. I mean, my dad's left formal education probably when he was about 12, but he was a voracious reader, amazing, could spell anything, could do Times crossword. He was a pretty switched on guy. He was a lot older than my mum. And he was cool. He played a lot of golf. I didn't really see an awful lot of him when I was growing up because he was either working or on the golf course. But he used to, I remember he'd come home from work and I'd sit on the back. We had a big green Chesterfield sofa when I was quite small. He'd come home from work and I'd get on the back of the sofa behind him and I'd put my legs over his shoulders and I'd put my little pink plastic curlers in his hair and sort out his somewhat receding hair. It was a bit of a shame when he started shaving it all off, really, because I couldn't do his hair for him. But it was cool. And my mum was a war baby. And she grew up in Walworth in the East End. So my nan my nan worked in hospitality for many years. She worked at the National Liberal Club, which is a private members club still going. She served 4 or 5 prime ministers, people like Bertrand Russell, Edmundo Ross, lots of big band leaders and all sorts of things. Lots of people in television. My nan had a very interesting life. She then went from there. She worked as a receptionist in television, had to tell the Beatles to put their joints out whilst they were waiting to go and see the Director General in Television House. And my mum did, my mum's really, really handy. She's a great seamstress. My mum did her apprenticeship at Harrods in the tailoring department. And she then worked in the rag trade for a guy called Nat Fox first, which was kind of, sort of fast fashion, or as fast as it got in the 60s. And then later became the sample machinist for a guy who was a very famous designer, particularly knitwear designer back in the day, a guy called, his name's escaped me now. Was it a Scottish guy? What was his name? Oh, he was very, very fat. I knew this was going to happen. Menopause, brain.
I'm sure it'll pop back into your head later, so we can pick up on that later. So you thought about being a vet, so there's quite a lot of work involved in that. A lot of people don't realise it's like about 7 years, I think, training, isn't it? I think it's longer to train as a vet than to train as a doctor, because you've got lots of different animals and they've all got slightly different anatomies. So there's a lot of work to do that. So did you actually start down that, or was it just I fancy being a vet? And that's as far as it got?
Yeah, in a word, no. So a couple of reasons, mainly because I never applied myself enough at school. I always felt I've always been really good at retaining information.
I've got my lights to turn back on.
Your lights have gone off. So I've always been quite good at retaining information. I would have been really good with the old A-level system, where you just sort of rocked up and had a go at the exams, really. But I was the very first year of GCSEs, and you had to do coursework and apply yourself for the whole duration of the year, rather than just wing it on a couple of exam papers, which was didn't really play to my strengths, to be honest with you. So I remember for my geography GCSE, for example, my head of geography, June Lee, my Auntie June, as I call her, had to lock me. We had 6 months to do a project and I hadn't done it. So she locked me in the geography room for 3 days, and I had to write the whole thing in 3 days. And it was marked in 3 sections. And I always remember I dropped half a point on each section. And a couple of my friends, like who, put the work in, were pretty miffed at me. So so basically I didn't really apply myself. I didn't work particularly hard. I put most of my energy, as it says on most of my school reports, into entertaining the rest of the school. It was that classic, if Sarah put as much energy into her work as she does entertaining the rest of the school, she'd be, and all that, not fulfilling her potential.
But we've got to have some entertainers, otherwise it would be boring, wouldn't it? School
Absolutely.
time?
Yeah, that doesn't wash when you're on report, does it? Yeah. So I then decided...
Every class has got at least one, haven't they? That can take off the teachers, tell good jokes, a bit of an artist sometimes on the blackboard in my day, that kind of stuff. There's always one at least in the room, if not a couple. Yeah,
absolutely. And to be honest with you, I was really, really lucky, particularly at St. Catherine's, because we had a teaching staff that nurtured that. They, I've really felt that it wasn't just all about academic achievement, and there was that kind of nurturing. I'm still really good friends with several of my teachers, 2 in particular who I regularly go away with and skiing with and such like. And they in particular saw, I think I had a conversation with them once over quite a few beers when we were skiing. And one of them said, I can remember when you came on your first day and we looked out the window and you were doing some sort of Irish jig around. There's all these little really scared first years, and I was doing an Irish jig around a netball post or something. And one of them called the other one over to the window and went, "Look down there, we'll nurture that one." So I had a great time. And I then eventually decided that I was probably going to go into the Met and be a dog handler. But I thought I'd give myself some options by going away to university, because they, at the time, the Met had a graduate program where you could fast track through, and I'd become quite a big fan of the Bill by then. The Bill had come out, and but I also was on.
Quite a few people have watched a program and thought, "I'm going to do that." You know, whether it was Soldier to Soldier, The Bill, All Creatures Great and Small, all sorts of different programs as a youngster, and it imprints this idea of this wonderful job on your mind.
Yeah, it does. And obviously the reality is probably very, very different, isn't it? So my options at that stage when I came away for uni were I was either going to come back and go into the Met, or I was going to be the new David Attenborough. But so I read environmental science at uni, which was brilliant. And one of the reasons why I chose Wolverhampton, actually, which seems a bit weird, but they'd run a really good environmental science course since 72, and it wasn't the environmental studies thing, which was all about like town planning and all that boring stuff. This was a very modular and holistic approach to like conservation, meteorology, geology, ecology, quite a holistic approach to it. So yeah, so that was my goal. But then it was obviously very apparent quite quickly that I'm too loud and sweary to be the next David Attenborough, and excitable.
I wouldn't say anything like that about you.
Could you imagine it?
Is that how you ended up in Wolverhampton then, is it?
Yeah, I ended up in Wolverhampton. And I can remember phoning my dad from a phone box and saying, I'm coming straight back at the end of 3 years. Like nothing's open after 10 o'clock at night. And then I discovered it was £1.70 a pint, and sort of, softened
a few other
bit
benefits then.
Yeah.
So what was the first job then?
Oh, my very first job was probably, my dad said he'd had to take me to the car yard one day because my mum was working, and when he looked out, I'd pulled a little bucket round and was washing somebody's windscreen and then putting my hand out for money. So that was probably the very first one. I got a great job in a Saturday job in a shoe shop in Oxford Street, Marble Arch end of Oxford Street, Peter Lord, and I worked there for about 2 years, and then my manageress, who I've just found via the magic of Facebook and LinkedIn. She lives in Luxembourg now, and we're going to hopefully hook up sometime in October. So she was my first supervisor stroke manager. She got headhunted by another company. I went with them, and then I basically worked with Helen at Tandem Shoes in Lakeside in Thurrock and in Essex until I moved up to uni. Yeah, so that was my first job.
What about after uni then? So did you go into anything that was actually, tied to your degree, or was it, just the job that came along, or, the opportunity that sounded right?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I sort of ended up falling into something. So what happened was when I finished uni, again, I think we were one of the first years for student grants, student loans. So, we'd all taken out student loans and like bought mountain bikes and new stereos. And, instead of like a year's supply of pop noodle and paying your rent, we sort of went a bit mad, to be honest with you. But so I came out of university with quite a lot of debt, and there were the jobs in the environmental green space were fairly few and far between in the early 90s. And the ones that they were, quite frankly, and I know this isn't the point of it, but the pay was crap. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be paying these loans off until I'm 77. So I thought, well, do you know what? I know how to sell. I know about cars. I'll get a job in a car dealership and I'll earn loads of money and I'll pay all my debts off. And then I'll go and become David Attenborough. So I printed off 30 CVs. I walked around Wolverhampton and handed my CV into various dealerships. I then went over to Stourbridge and handed my CV into various dealerships and just did that in sort of Wolverhampton, Stourbridge, Walsall. I think I avoided Dudley, not sure why. But yeah, and I got a call from Lex Rover in Stourbridge saying, because I'd kind of pestered the sales manager in there a bit. I managed to get hold of him, pestered him, offered to work for a month free of charge.
That's That's very entrepreneurial, isn't it?
Yeah, they paid me anyway, to be honest with you. I said I'll do commission only, but they did pay me anyway. And I did that for about 2.5 years. So again, because I've kind of grown up on a car yard a bit, it was, you know,
So you've
it
got
was
the car background, you've got the selling piece from the shoe shop, just bringing the two together.
Yeah, yeah. And at the time, so a couple of years afterwards, I mean, I was young, I was early 20s, brand new car every 3 months, but I was in the dealership like all the time, 7 days, you know, practically 7 days a week. And you know, the blush wore off fairly quickly. And my very good friend at the time and housemate who'd been through uni together, the woman called Lisa Yates, she'd had a very similar thing, did a politics degree, got a job selling Fords over in Blockswich. And I think then she ended up at the Peugeot in Sedgley, and she then got a job in recruitment with Brook Street and said to me, why don't you get into recruitment? It's a lot easier than selling cars and you can make just as much, if not more money, and you don't have to work weekends. So I just started looking in the newspaper, and Extra Personnel was a growing regional brand at the time. They had a lot of adverts in the newspaper. I applied to them and Kelly's. I got interviews for both. I got offers for both. And I basically just opened up the Express and Star and saw that 3 pages was covered with Extra Personnel adverts. And there were about 3 for Kelly. So I took the job at Extra Personnel, which I can remember, I started in September of 96 and my payroll number was 33. I was the 33rd person to start with.
So quite a small company at that time then.
Yeah, they were. They just sold last year. They were a £380 million turnover company last year and sold.
That's a big growth, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what did you do first of all in recruitment then? So was there a particular niche that they slotted you into? Anyone who's looking for a job in a car showroom who's got shoe selling experience?
No, basically. So what happened? Extra is and was still quite a generalist agency. So they did a lot in the industrial and transport space, and they also had commercial desks, which was primarily, you know, anything really office based. And so I started as a trainee.
Temporary staff, or was it permanent you did?
They did, as a business, we did both, but I went in on a temporary desk as what they call it, temp controller, which I really liked because I quite liked the pace of it. So I joined as a trainee temp controller, and they basically would they were very entrepreneurial, and basically they take on pretty much anybody who had some sales experience, you know, bit of chat, and would pick the phones up basically, because it was all about growing the business. It was very proactive. And so my training was, at the time, I always remember, we had cards, we had yellow cards where I was given a desk, a phone and some cards. I think I had a PC, and it was basically like, off you go. Get some bookings on. So the training did improve over the years, and I basically just worked my way through the business. So I had various guises as became desk manager, department manager, branch manager. I was a troubleshooter at one stage, and national account manager, and eventually just before I left, several years before I left, I was head of corporate sales in the public sector division. So I was writing tenders for big, sort of multi-million pound contracts, and then sort of high level overview, managing those and dealing with our teams around out and about in the branch networks.
So how many years was that over then?
I was 13 years altogether with Extra Personnel, the staffing group. And I actually, just before all the lockdowns, they invited me to go and train a lot of their staff and their managers in sales. So I did a few days of training for them a couple of years ago. And which is quite nice to be invited back, especially when I got their head office was in Walsall. When I got there in the morning, my old parking space was free. So I dumped my car in it. Yeah, and do you know what? It was really, really weird because, I hadn't set foot in this building for 13 years. And as I walked in, it was like it had just been the weekend break. I walked in and everyone was like, or lots of the people were like, all right, Bish, morning, how are you doing? It was really bizarre, but felt really comfortable. It was very strange, but really lovely at the same time. Great people at Extra.
So,
Really
so
great
why
people.
why did you leave there? Was there a particular challenge you were looking to go and get? Were you offered something? So why did you decide to leave? I mean, it sounded like you'd had a great time for those 13 years, progressed well, and it sounds like, even going back, you enjoyed it. It was a great place to work.
Yeah, absolutely. There was no sort of, big rift or anything like that, or, sort of flouncing out or anything. I just felt like I needed a new challenge and wanted to do
Yeah,
something different. So whilst it was a challenge to secure the big contracts and get the big sales on, it had started to get a little bit samey, and I did have a couple of issues with quality on some of our departments, and I just didn't feel it was taken quite as seriously as it perhaps could have been.
yeah,
In the grand scheme of things, they're the ones that have sold out for millions and billions and trillions of pounds, or however much it was, isn't it? And that, so it worked, but I just felt that I couldn't countenance that moving and just going to basically a different logo, because things in the industry were quite similar. But I also knew that I would find it very difficult to pick up the phone and try to sell to somebody who I've just spent the last 13 years convincing that Extra Personnel is the best option. It just didn't
yeah,
really didn't really vibe with my integrity. So I thought, well, the only way that I can sort of do it how I really want to is set up on my own, which is what we did. And so it's been 13 years since I set up Recruit, and that was a ride, I can tell you.
yeah. So I've been there myself. I set up 18 years ago, and at the beginning, there's a lot of things you just take. You think is being done by someone else, because it usually is when you work for someone else. But when you work for yourself, you've got to do everything, all the way through, and it's quite interesting, isn't it? A few ups and downs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
what was
but
the
come
biggest
out the other end.
challenge then? Do you think you had when you first set up Recruit? Then,
When we very first set up, I mean, the first thing was it was 2009, so we were in the last big recession, and it was quite funny because I say it's funny. It was funny in hindsight. At the time, I just wept quite a lot, quite regularly, But I remember opening up the local newspaper on jobs night to see who I could canvass to get some jobs on, and there were no jobs in the newspaper. So that was really difficult, and really getting around. I think, like you've just said, really, Lee, is I worked for by the time I left Extra Personnel, we had about a headcount of around about 250 people. So we had very well established support functions. I had a marketing department who who I used to rile by phoning them up and go, "Is that the colouring in department?" As you do. But you had IT there, didn't you, on hand to sort out your laptop or your PC or the printer when it wasn't ruddy working, all those sorts of things. Really, it's just that juggling everything and trying to put it together whilst also bringing in the business and delivering operationally. I mean, it's madness, really, isn't it? It's a form of madness going out on your own.
yeah, but that also, there's some really good highs as well, isn't there? When things go well, you get a good contract, you get good feedback from a customer for the work you've done. So there's a lot of good points to it as well. And also, you're not going to get sacked, are you, when you work for yourself, unless you're really bad or
I don't know, happy
split
days.
personality, and then that could be an issue. But commonly, as long as you do it right, you've got a bit of stability, because it's not down to other people to make those decisions. It's down to you. And if you've got the capabilities to work with it well inside another business, I think most people have got the capability of doing their own thing. But it's hard at the beginning, like you say, getting the first customer, getting the first contract, getting some money in is the challenge. So you're really going at it full guns, aren't you, at the beginning, just to get started, and then gradually it gets easier over time. But it's normally like a few years down the line, it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when, afterwards, the next thing was when we had, I think at our largest, we had about 9 or 10 on the team. And that brought with it a lot of sleepless nights because, there were months where I was like, how am I going to get everybody paid, and bring in enough to cover everything. And it was, yeah, it was tough. It was tough mentally and physically and emotionally. It was actually quite draining, even when we weren't doing
Yeah.
too badly. But
Because you've got the operational issues of managing people and organising all the things that you need to do for them to be able to do their job. But it's also then, like you say, it's the financial aspects, making sure there's enough sales coming in to be able to cover wage each month. Yeah, and that can be a challenge, can't it?
yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah,
it's all good fun, and it's what don't kill you makes you stronger, doesn't it? At the
true,
end of the day.
true.
So yeah.
So 13 years you've been doing it. So at the beginning, were you doing what you're doing today, or has it changed over that 13 years?
It's changed fairly substantially, and a lot of the change has really been in the last 4 or 5 years. So so
So
we
what did you
we
start doing then? What was the beginning? Was it just taking that model that you'd been at with the previous employer and trying to create something similar? Is that what you did to start with?
Yeah, fairly similar. Other than we concentrated more on permanent placements than the
Yeah.
temporary stuff. And yeah, we did build along similar sorts of models to a certain extent. However, there were some things that we did differently. So very early on, and this was primarily as a survival thing in the very early days. So one of the first things that I brought in as they say necessity is the mother of invention, don't they? So, but
Yeah.
very early on, we started doing, alongside our full recruitment packages, we started doing an advertising only thing, because we were finding that people, because it was a recession, loads of people had been laid off, lots of businesses just weren't prepared to pay recruitment fees, but we could package up a sort of more comprehensive advertising stream for them, which at the time that was called Recruit 123. That's now Recruit Direct in our business. We still offer it for some businesses that prefer that model. And then through the years, as I say, we had a team. I won't bore you with the tales of woe of a business split, which I, up until D-Day, thought was amicable. And then you find out it's not, don't you, sometimes? And then find out all the stuff that's gone by the by. But I'm not bitter about. I was for a long time, but I'm not anymore. Again, you live and learn, don't you? So throughout that process, basically lost the team. We'd had a big surprise. Let's just say I didn't really do. So I'm very much a big picture person. This is, I suppose, a cautionary tale to people out there who have got their own businesses or are going out in their business. I'm not a sort of facts and figures and detail kind of person. So I largely ignored things like, the account, just as long as we had enough money to cover the bills and pay this, that, and the other. That's all I really ever paid attention to. So when I was splitting the business, I didn't really do due diligence because, again, as I say, I thought it was all amicable. Several months afterwards, got a massive surprise in terms of a debt that was owed to HMRC. And basically, that kind of came at a time which sort of precipitated I was already on the way to a little bit of a breakdown. So I nearly lost my house. I nearly became bankrupt, had my car repossessed. There was all sorts of things. Somebody was threatening to sue me for something which it was very quickly proven was all completely untrue. And I basically had a bit of a nervous breakdown and then just didn't really function very well as a human being for about 3 or 4 months, which it surprised me because I am that really irritating eternal optimist. There is, there's always a solution. I'm a kind of fix-it, solutions-based kind of gal, and I just sort of completely
But
lost
these
it all.
things can
So,
affect anyone, can't they? However resilient you are and however optimistic you are, things can always get to a point where you can't deal with it. And I think that's one thing a lot of people have got to think about. Can I cope where I am? Because if I'm getting to that stage, you do need other people to support you. Where that's just someone to tell how you feel and things, just get it off your chest about how you feel and things like that. And I would, if anybody watching this, if you are getting to that point, you need to speak to someone, because it can spiral down even worse, where people can effectively, take their lives and things like that. And we don't want people to get to that level. But a lot of people find it hard to talk to people about it, don't they? And explain how
yeah.
they feel. And I think a lot of people feel as if it's like they're failures, because of these situations. In reality, a lot of times it's nothing to do with that. It's circumstances. Circumstances change, especially when you're changing your business and you're splitting from a business partner and you're breaking that business up. If you're not careful, things can come out the woodwork and bite you badly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would urge anybody to talk to somebody. I mean, I probably should have spoken to a mental health professional. I didn't. I had loads of friends, real, and again, at times like that, you really do find out who your real friends are, don't you? So
Yeah.
I had loads of people there. I had loads of people that I could have lent on. It is very difficult. I get the ump a bit where people put on Facebook, if you need an ear, just phone me. And it's like, you need to be a bit more proactive than that,
Yeah.
because when you can't even shower yourself, you're not going to pick up the phone and ask
No,
somebody for help,
very true.
because so it's like, pick up the phone, and lots of lovely friends that did, and how are you, and you do the usual, oh, I'm all right, or whatever, and so I think you're absolutely right. I was very, very lucky in that my wife was absolutely brilliant. She wasn't my wife at the time, my partner at the time, now my wife. And she had a really tough time with it because she was trying to support me via WhatsApp from Vienna, So
Yeah.
it was that was pretty hard. But, and again, if you're much for reading business books, self-help books, biographies and autobiographies, there's a common theme, and nearly everybody who then goes to turn things around hits a kind of a rock bottom of some description at some stage. And
Yeah.
that whole experience, then coupled with the pandemic, has actually helped me to completely change the complexion of my business. So one of the things is everything's done much more remotely now. So I now split my time between Vienna, the UK, and in the UK, I'm either in the Midlands, Wales, Surrey, like sort of, running around. I could be much more nomadic. But I also work very much with an associate and a networked model. So I've technically got one employee, my magical, marvelous Marianne, who's fantastic, who's been with me through thick and thin, because she saw everything from both sides. She's there, been absolute stellar. It's been amazing. She's on holiday in Devon at the moment, having a very well-earned break. And everything else I either outsource or I do split fees and such like. And it's turned to, it's been a great way of working. It's allowed us to pull in much bigger business, deal with much bigger projects, which we've been doing, which has then allowed me to further invest in some of the other directions that we're also going in. So we're starting to do a lot more retained search. I've just spent out quite a bit of money on getting both myself and my sort of main associates, Becky and Claire, upskilled in real deep dive X-ray search and retained search. So yeah, so it's been a great, when you're going through it and you can't see the end. I just had this mantra in the end, which was just, this too shall pass, this too shall pass. I just was like, rocking in the corner, murmuring to myself, this too shall pass. And you know what? It did, because everything does, doesn't it? The bad times, the good times, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Things.
The thing is, if you don't have bad times, you don't know what good times feel like. you've got to have the contrast, haven't you? It's like the salt and the sweet in food. I know you're a bit of a foodie yourself, but without contrast, you can't experience something. And I think, going through life when everything's good, you don't really feel how good it is until you've actually had bad times. And most of us go through those experiences at some stage, whether that's personal, whether that's business, whatever. We go through difficulties, and then we can see then the contrast between the two, and it makes it much sweeter, the good parts in life, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, I
how are
agree
you
with that.
managing? How long have you been doing this splitting between Vienna and Wolverhampton and disappearing off to Wales then? So has that been quite a new development, or has that been a while?
Well, Katya and I have been together for I think it's about 6 years now. And previously, our relationship was, we'd see each other for a weekend every month. We'd alternate who came where, and then we'd have holidays together. So it was very much a long distance relationship. And then during lockdown, it was there wasn't really much point in me going back sometimes when I'd come over. So I drive over because our dog is too fat to fly. He's not fat, he's just big. He's 12 kilos, he's a schnauzer. So I drive with the dog, and it just makes sense when you've had quite a long drive to stay for extended periods. And we found that it works because I'd wanted to work much more like this before the pandemic and had started mooted it with people, but people still wanted you to come and see them.
Yeah.
But everyone's so used to now doing stuff on Zoom that they're quite happy to do that. And I can now either fly back. I mean, I split my time 50-50 between the two countries. Partly, I'll be honest with you, partly because I have to be domiciled in the UK for 6 months for tax purposes. But I don't really see why, because I just pay all my taxes in the UK anyway. I haven't offshored anything or done anything fancy, like some of our friends in Westminster.
Some of
And I
that's
don't.
coming out at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah,
With the race for the next PM.
Yeah, so all good fun. So and I just felt that, do you know what? I'd like to travel more, and I'd like to. I'm all one for work-life blend. I get a bit bored if I'm not working, to be honest with you. So I'm not by any means a workaholic, but there's only so much Lego I can build and books I can read, and I just started getting a little bit ants in my pants, and I love now like more of the strategic stuff, the bringing stuff together. And the next step is later on this year, we'll be inviting more people to join as associates if they want a similar lifestyle. If they want to earn a full-time salary, they love recruitment and they're good at it, but they want to work from home or from wherever. I don't care, but So Claire, who works with me, Claire's a very good friend, a very, very dear friend, but also an ex-work colleague. And she joined us last year, mainly because she felt she needed just something to do for herself. And we'd got really busy with a big contract that we got with the guys at Your Dr. Film and Media. Let's shout out those guys. Fantastic story, incredible. Went from startup to like over 220 people in 21 months, providing COVID services to the film and media industry. That was a hell of a ride. Brilliant to work with. And Claire, for example, she went for April, had a whole month, her and her family had a whole month off in Thailand. So, and she didn't work while she was away. But I said to her, if you want to go for 2 or 3 months, just take your laptop next time. work from there.
So if you were going to tell people a bit about what recruit is different, so if you wanted to try and give them a few USPs and that, what would you say? Why should people come and speak to recruit for some of their recruitment needs?
Okay, I think first of all, speak to us if you've got a similar outlook. So, I was head of corporate sales and dealt in very corporate environments for many years. But as you can probably tell, I'm not really one for corporate BS. So we've got very simple values. I've got very simple values, and our core values are quite simply, I don't know who's got the time marker down for now, but they're basically integrity, fun, and getting shit done. And that's what we do. We operate with integrity. We're honest. We're open book. We're transparent. We like to have a bit of fun. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but we do get the job done. So I think if it doesn't matter whether you're a big corporate. We do have some big corporate clients, but we don't work very well with stuffed shirts. People who take themselves very, very seriously. I always drag my feet a little bit on this USP question, because I'll be honest with you, I don't really think there's much that's unique nowadays. There's so much out there. I think anybody who says what makes us unique is that we care have you ever seen a website where someone's put what makes us unique is we couldn't give a crap? Everybody says they care, don't they? Nobody's going to say they don't care. I find it a little bit.
I think what you're saying really boils down to one thing: cultural compatibility. So if you've got a culture that's the same across two different organizations, one, say, a startup or a fast-growing business that needs recruitment, and you've got a recruitment company that's got a similar culture about, getting rid of the bullshit, sorting out what needs to be done and getting it done, it works, doesn't it? And I think
absolutely,
that's the thing.
yeah.
So cultural compatibility, which is key, I think, these days, to make sure that things can be done quickly. If you're not compatible, it don't work. It's like personal relationships. If the two people aren't compatible, it's not going to work. If they are. If they like the same things and they enjoy doing it together, it's going to work. And it's same with businesses. It's having that cultural compatibility is quite important for it to work.
Absolutely. We do very much become part of, the client's team that we work for. That is why it's so important. And the other thing that we do is we collaborate with what is our competition. So we've got a network of over 700 independent recruiters through the team network, the employment agents movement. So we've got really niche suppliers. So we can spread our net. So we've got an agility as well. So particularly when we don't only work with fast growth startups, but we work particularly well with them because we have that agility. So, when people are starting a business, they're running around trying to do everything, and they often need skill sets that are over here, over there, everywhere. And we've got that agility because we just pull in the expert in their field, and we just split the fees. I'm not greedy. I just want my clients to have the right people, and then they come back to us. So, it makes commercial sense as well as being, the ethical and right thing to do, really.
Well, so if anybody's interested in having a look at Recruit, we've got Sarah Bishop from Recruit. The website's here, so have a look on the website. You'll be able to get contact details from there as well. Find out a bit about the three main areas of service that Recruit offer. But also, if you want to look Sarah up on LinkedIn, there's Sarah's details. So it's Sarah Bishop 1, or just search for Sarah Bishop. You'll be able to find her on there and make contact as well. So I gave you a couple of questions at the beginning that I always ask at the end. So the first one was, what's the best meal you've ever had? Where was it? What was it? And why was it the best meal?
Yeah, and I said this was going to be difficult. I think this is difficult for anybody, but us ADHDers really struggle with these lists of best of or top 10 songs and whatever. We will either be incredibly clear on it, or it's just going to be a hazy mess. And mine's probably a bit of a hazy mess. Very recently, I was blessed to get a table at Mere restaurant in Fitzrovia, which is owned by the amazing Monica Galetti of MasterChef fame. And we had the tasting menu there, and it was phenomenal. I'm a bit of a one for tasting menus. I've also, in the last year, been twice to a place called Villa Mittermeier, which is in Rottenburg ob der Tauber in Germany. A guy called Christian Mittermeier, who's on LinkedIn as well. Again, another tasting menu there. It was absolutely fabulous. But one of my favourites has probably been a place called Gut Purbach, which is in Burgenland near Eisenstadt in Austria. And the guy there, Max Stiegel, is one of their celebrity chefs. who's on the TV quite a lot. Our friends Mickey and Martina, who took us, he's Mickey's sort of hero, culinary hero. Of course, I didn't know him from Adam, and he was actually there when we went. But one of the things he specialises in is they use every single part of the animal.
Yeah.
Like they use everything. So we had like lung, and
nose to
all sorts
tail,
of things, which was and it was absolutely delicious. So yeah, so I know that doesn't nail it down to one, and I know that's a bit of a cheat, but I probably couldn't.
Sounds good to me. There's a bit more of a story about the one at Mere, though, isn't it? But we may not tell that publicly about how you got the actual table.
No, because I might not get a table there ever again.
I remember you telling the story once, but
and I've got clients that I need to take.
Yeah. So the next question is, what's the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
Right, well, starting out in business has probably got to be up there. But other than that, I think probably in 2003, I trekked through the Great Rift Valley in Kenya. And that was absolutely incredible. And it's those things that I want to make some more adventures. I want to do a few more sort of, road trips and exploring and stuff like that now.
It comes back to the old adage, it's not the amount of breaths that you've taken in your life that measures a life, it's the amount of times your breath's taken away in life, isn't it? Seeing something, experienced something that makes you think, that is unbelievable, and having those experiences, and I'm sure that was very similar to that. We've got plans to do a variety of things in South Africa. We're looking, I've been there myself, but my wife wants to go there and experience the big 5 animals and things. We're going to experience some time in Japan. There's lots of things we want to do in life, and I'm sure you've got a massive list as well of things you want to get. I think the trouble is life's too short, and our pockets aren't quite full enough sometimes to do everything we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the game, isn't it? Now it's working out that secret. So
yeah. But it's been great having you on. We're just coming up to nearly an hour, so we'll shut it down at this point. So if you could stay on afterwards and we can have a quick chat about how things have gone. We haven't had any more comments come in since Des. He put in on something about Jack. I'm not sure what that meant, whether it's to do with the designer that you were talking about before, if that came to mind. But
who was?
nothing else.
What was his name? It was Oh, it came and went again then. Oh, see,
don't
women of a
worry.
certain age,
what you can do is when it comes to mind again, stick it in the comments on LinkedIn so everybody knows which designer it was that your grandmother used to work for. But it's been great having you.
That was my mum. That was my mum, not my
grandmother. It was your mother.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my mum.
Yeah, and then it's been great having you on. And say anybody's interested in learning more about Sarah and her business, you've got the contact details. Watch it again through LinkedIn, on YouTube as well. You get to watch it there, and we're going to post the YouTube link for the recording as well. So thanks ever so much, everybody, and see you next Tuesday, where we've got, I believe, we're just finalising it off. Tina Gravel, who's from Appgates in the US. So we're just finalising details for that. She was one of the speakers at the recent Women in Alliances conference I was involved with. And we've got a number of other speakers that are going to come along and talk about their experience in senior corporate life and the difficult challenges of being a woman in some of those positions as well. So it'll be interesting to hear about Tina next Tuesday at 2:00. Well, thanks ever so much.
Thanks so much, Lee.